Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when pain knocks at the door, not as a curse, but as a call not to break you, but to break you open. The wound you've spent your entire life avoiding, the one you fear most, is not here to destroy you. It's here to free you, because until you face it, you are only living half a life. Today, I invite you to journey beyond fear, beyond illusion, and into the place where your deepest wound becomes your greatest awakening. The wound you fear most is not just a scar from the past, it is a threshold, and what you fear is not the pain itself, but the transformation it will demand from you. The human psyche is built to preserve its image of stability. It resists disruption, clings to identity, and avoids descent into the unknown. That is why the wound, especially the one buried deepest, carries such dread. It threatens the illusion of who you think you are. It challenges the mask you've worn to survive in the world, but growth does not occur in safety. It begins at the point where comfort ends and the truth begins to surface. To face your wound is to step into chaos. And chaos is the birthplace of transformation. What you have suppressed, the memories, emotions, desires, fears, they are not gone. They live beneath the surface, shaping your behavior, your relationships, your reactions. You fear the wound because it holds the parts of yourself you were once forced to exile, the inner child who wasn't protected, the anger you learned to bury, the grief you never gave time to. These fragments of the soul do not disappear. They wait for your willingness to return and reclaim them. Pain is the language of the soul asking to be heard, and the reason you fear your pain so much is because you sense that once you truly face it, something in you will break, and it must. Not your essence, but the false structure you built to avoid the truth. The ego resists this process fiercely. It fears losing control. It fears the death of its carefully crafted image, but the soul is not interested in appearances. It is only concerned with wholeness. Your wound does not want you to stay in suffering. It wants you to move through it consciously, not to numb, bypass, or rush the process, but to feel it fully, to bear witness to the depth of your humanity. When you allow yourself to descend into the wound, you begin to see that it is not simply a place of pain. It is a gateway. Through it, you meet the hidden aspects of your psyche, the shadow, the unloved self, the forgotten potential. Avoiding the wound is what gives it power. What you resist becomes your master, but what you embrace becomes your teacher. The wound is not chaos for chaos's sake. It holds order in disguise. Within it lie the pieces of your wholeness scattered through time. When you choose to turn toward it, you are not giving in to weakness. You are stepping into the most courageous act possible, radical self-confrontation. You may think healing is about becoming perfect or finally fixed, but that is another illusion. Healing is about becoming whole. It's about integrating the broken, disowned, painful aspects of your psyche into a conscious, unified self. That is transformation, that is liberation, not the removal of scars, but the reclaiming of them as sacred. Every wound you carry has shaped the architecture of your identity, but not all of that identity is true. Some of it was built in reaction to pain, some of it in rebellion, some of it in survival. What transformation asks is that you strip away what is false, not by force, but by awareness. The more conscious you become of what the wound has done to you, the more choice you have in what you do with it now. You begin to realize that the wound is not just the site of suffering. It is the seed of your wisdom. It teaches empathy, humility, and strength. It shows you what matters, what needs to change, and what must be released. And in this process, you become more than a person carrying pain. You become a person who has metabolized that pain into presence, clarity, and depth. There is no formula for this work. There is only the willingness to stay present to what is uncomfortable, the capacity to listen when every instinct tells you to run, the courage to feel when the heart wants to close. This is not about glorifying suffering. It is about trusting that your soul knew exactly what it was doing when it led you to this point of rupture. Transformation is terrifying because it asks you to let go of what you thought was you. But what remains after that surrender is something more honest, more grounded, more alive. You emerge not healed in the superficial sense, but whole in the deepest sense, and in that wholeness you discover that the wound was never your enemy. It was your invitation. The wound you fear is symbolic. It is not just a personal injury or a past experience. It is the psychic representation of the part of yourself you have most resisted. It stands as the gatekeeper to all that you've left unexplored within your soul. The wound is symbolic of rejection, abandonment, betrayal, guilt, shame, or helplessness. Whatever experience your psyche deemed too overwhelming to process fully in the moment it occurred. It became not only a scar, but a symbol of everything you believed you could not survive. Over time, you built around it. Walls of defense, distractions of the ego, personas that helped you adapt. And yet, no matter how far you wandered from it, the wound remains, pulling at you in moments of silence, in dreams, in relationships, in unexplained emotions. It is the symbolic core of your unfinished inner work, the center of gravity around which your unconscious has been orbiting all this time. You fear this wound because to approach it feels like death, not literal death, but ego death, the dissolution of your current self-image. To meet the wound is to face the truth that you are not who you pretend to be, you are not the mask, you are not the performance, you are not only the achievements or failures you display to the world. Beneath it all, there is something more ancient, more raw, more real. And that is what the wound reveals. It is not the pain itself that paralyzes you. It is the symbolic unraveling of your identity, the collapse of your illusions, the confrontation with your long buried fears and desires. That is why the wound is so terrifying. It doesn't just hurt. It threatens to change everything, but paradoxically, that is also why the wound holds such power, because in its symbolic nature, it also contains your liberation. It is both the lock and the key. The wound symbolizes not only the pain you once endured, but the life force you abandoned alongside it, the forgotten parts of your soul, your creativity, your rage, your innocence, your capacity to feel and to love. All of that is stored in the shadow of the wound. You cannot be whole until you reclaim it. You cannot become yourself until you integrate it. You may believe you are protecting yourself by avoiding the wound, but in reality, you are keeping yourself incomplete. You are surviving, perhaps, but not fully living. When you dare to approach the wound, you begin to experience an entirely different relationship with yourself. You shift from victimhood to responsibility, not blame, not shame, but the responsibility to sit with your truth without fleeing. You begin to observe the patterns you've repeated, the roles you've played, the relationships you've attracted, all shaped unconsciously by the energy of that unhealed place. You begin to understand that what felt like fate was actually the repetition of an unresolved wound. The symbolic becomes practical, and the insight becomes power. You realize that freedom is not found in denial, but in courageous acceptance of what is. This process is not linear. The wound speaks in symbols, in metaphors, in images and dreams. It does not respond to rational control. It asks for your presence, your patience, your willingness to feel what you once could not. It may bring up waves of grief, anger, confusion, or even numbness. These are not signs of regression. They are signs of contact. You are finally touching what you've spent years avoiding. In that contact, the transformation begins, not because the pain goes away immediately, but because your relationship with it changes. You are no longer the frightened child within the pain. You are the adult self, aware and witnessing, capable of holding space for what once overwhelmed you. The symbolic wound also carries within it the exact qualities you most need for growth. If the wound is abandonment, then your path is to learn trust. If the wound is betrayal, then your path is to rebuild integrity. If the wound is shame, your path is to reclaim dignity. The wound does not curse you, it directs you. It contains a sacred blueprint for your individuation, the process of becoming whole and fully yourself. But that blueprint is encrypted in fear, discomfort, and inner conflict. It demands a descent into the unconscious. It asks that you give up certainty, that you let go of who you were in order to become who you are. The wound you fear most is the very wound that opens you to your inner world. It is the passageway through which all transformation flows. If you can meet it without judgment, if you can listen without resistance, it will show you what has been hidden. It will return to you the parts of your soul you believed were lost forever. It will undo the psychic knot that has kept you small. And though the journey is demanding, there is no greater reward than the self that emerges from such courageous work, grounded, authentic, fully alive. Avoidance strengthens the shadow because what is not faced consciously is pushed into the unconscious, where it does not vanish but transforms. It grows in silence, gathering power in the darkness, shaping behaviors, emotions, and choices from behind the scenes. What is exiled from the light does not die, it waits, and the longer it waits, the more distorted it becomes. The parts of yourself you disown, the anger you suppress, the fear you deny, the grief you numb, form the architecture of the shadow. They cluster in hidden corners of the psyche, influencing your perceptions and reactions in ways you cannot trace. You may believe you've moved on from what hurt you, but the wound does not operate on the timeline of your will. It waits for acknowledgement, not dismissal, and the more you avoid it, the more it demands your attention, often through projection, conflict, anxiety, or deep dissatisfaction. The shadow is not inherently evil or destructive. It is simply unintegrated. It is the collection of everything you could not accept in yourself, everything you thought you had to hide to be loved, accepted, or safe. It includes not only pain, but also power qualities that could not be expressed freely in the environments that shaped you. To avoid these parts is to remain fragmented. You become split between the self you present and the self you repress. And that split creates inner tension, emotional exhaustion, and psychological imbalance. The energy it takes to keep the shadow hidden is immense. It drains the vitality of the conscious mind, weakens emotional resilience, and creates patterns of sabotage or self-betrayal. What is feared within becomes feared outside of you, and so the world becomes a mirror of your disowned self. Avoidance doesn't just empower the shadow, it blinds you to it. You stop seeing your own part in your suffering. You project your wounds onto others, you mistake external enemies for internal pain, you find yourself repeating emotional cycles without understanding why. The person who has avoided their shadow lives at the mercy of unconscious forces. They are moved by invisible hands, haunted by unexplained shame, drawn to relationships that replicate old traumas, and trapped in behaviors they cannot seem to change. This is not because they are broken. It is because they have never turned inward to see the source of the wound. The ego builds its kingdom on avoidance, on repression, on keeping the difficult truths out of reach. But the unconscious does not obey the ego. What is ignored will find a way to surface, if not in words, then in dreams, in sickness, in breakdown, or in the sudden collapse of the structures you thought were stable. Avoidance is a form of fear, and fear thrives in ignorance. The more you resist turning toward the shadow, the more monstrous it becomes in your imagination. But the truth is often less terrifying than the fantasy. The pain, when faced directly, begins to soften. The emotion, when named and felt, loses its grip. The shadow, when welcomed, becomes an ally. It contains wisdom that can only emerge through confrontation. The qualities you find most threatening may be the very strengths you need. What appears as anger may be repressed assertiveness. What feels like shame may mask an unacknowledged desire for freedom. The shadow does not wish to destroy you. It wants to be integrated. It wants to belong. Only when you stop avoiding it can you begin to recognize its messages and reclaim its gifts. The irony is that avoiding the shadow in order to stay safe makes you less safe. It leaves you vulnerable to unconscious compulsions. It creates a false sense of control, while the true forces driving your life remain unseen. Integration is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing relationship with your own depths. It begins with awareness, expands through honesty, and deepens through acceptance. You do not conquer the shadow through force. You dissolve it through understanding. You illuminate it through compassion. You transform it by inviting it into dialogue with your conscious self. The parts of you that once terrified you begin to reveal their human origin. The rage becomes a cry for boundaries. The grief becomes proof of love. The fear becomes evidence of your longing for connection. None of it is meaningless. All of it is part of you. When you stop avoiding the shadow, you begin to reclaim the power that has been scattered across your unconscious. You become less reactive, more grounded, more whole. You stop running from yourself and begin to live in alignment with what is true. Avoidance kept you small. Facing the shadow returns you to your full dimensions. It reconnects you to your instincts, your depth, your intuition. The fear that once controlled you begins to dissolve, not because it disappears, but because it has been understood. The shadow loses its hold when it is no longer a stranger. You recognize it as part of you, not your enemy but your reflection, and in this recognition you become free. The wound is a mirror. It reflects not only the moment of pain, but the many layers of self that formed around it. To look into it is not simply to remember what happened, but to confront who you became because of it. This mirror does not lie. It shows you the adaptations, the defenses, the roles you learn to play in order to keep going. It reveals the masks you wear and the stories you tell yourself to maintain a sense of identity. It does not flatter, it does not comfort, it simply reflects what is. And what is often hard to bear is not the original pain, but the recognition of how much of your life has been shaped by the avoidance of that pain. You may see a lifetime of overachievement built on the need to prove your worth. You may see patterns of silence, of self-erasure, of emotional distance created to avoid rejection. You may see the walls you built to feel safe and realize how they have also kept you isolated. The mirror shows not only your wounds but your longing. It reflects the parts of you still waiting to be acknowledged. The voice that was never heard, the anger that was never expressed, the tears that were never allowed to fall. You begin to see that beneath the adaptation lives a deeper self, one that never stopped hoping to be seen as it truly is. But to reach that self, to reclaim it, you must first look at the image the wound offers you. Not with judgment, not with shame, but with quiet presence. You must learn to look and not turn away, to remain still while the reflection unfolds its truth. It is a painful task. The mind rebels, the ego resists, the emotions surge and then numb again. But if you remain, if you continue to look with honesty and curiosity, the image begins to shift. You begin to separate who you are from what happened to you. You begin to recognize that the survival strategies you developed were necessary at the time. They kept you safe, kept you functioning, helped you stay connected in whatever way you could. And yet, what once protected you may now be what confines you. The wound mirrored in your behaviors is not asking you to hate those behaviors. It is asking you to understand them, to see where they came from, to see the child within you who first learned them, not as a failure, but as someone doing the best they could with what little they had. Looking into the wound as a mirror also reveals the unconscious beliefs you carry. You may see the hidden conviction that love must be earned, that your feelings are too much, that your needs will be met with abandonment. These beliefs are not facts. They are conclusions drawn in moments of vulnerability, and because they have remained unexamined, they continue to govern your life in subtle ways. They color your relationships, your sense of self, worth, your capacity for intimacy. But the moment you begin to see them clearly is the moment they begin to lose their power, not because they are banished, but because they are seen through. Awareness dissolves the illusion. The mirror reflects not just the wound, but the way out of it. What you feared in the reflection begins to change shape. The shame that felt unbearable begins to soften in the light of compassion. The grief becomes something sacred, something that connects you to your humanity. The anger, once denied or feared, becomes a source of clarity and strength. The image that once terrified you now speaks in a new language. It tells you that what you thought was broken was never unworthy, that what you tried to hide was never shameful, that your pain, when seen fully, becomes the foundation of your wholeness. You are not simply recovering from the wound. You are reassembling the self that was scattered by it. Each time you look into that mirror, you become more capable of holding the truth of who you are. You no longer need to hide. You no longer need to split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You can begin to live in alignment with the totality of your being. The wound no longer defines you, but it has shaped you. And now, instead of running from it, you can honor it as the place where your deeper self was waiting all along. This is not the kind of healing that erases the past. It is the kind that transforms your relationship to it. What once haunted you becomes the very source of your wisdom, your empathy, your resilience. The wound is a mirror, and when you have the courage to look into it, what you find is not just pain. It is truth, it is depth, and it is the beginning of becoming whole. Healing is not the goal, integration is. The modern understanding of healing often implies erasure, a return to purity, a final resolution where the wound is closed and the pain forgotten. But that is a misunderstanding of the psyche's deeper process. True inner work is not about being untouched by suffering, but about being shaped by it in a conscious, integrated way. The parts of you that were wounded are not stains to be scrubbed out of existence. They are aspects of your being that froze in time, fragments of your experience that still wait for you to return to them with presence and compassion. Healing in the shallow sense seeks to remove the pain. Integration asks you to hold it differently. Integration means allowing those painful, rejected, or repressed parts of yourself to become conscious, to be seen, understood, and welcomed into the whole of who you are. These are not problems to fix. They are voices to listen to. Each one carries a piece of your story, a part of your psyche that adapted to survive, even if the adaptation no longer serves you. Perhaps the part that shuts down in conflict was once a child who learned that silence was safety. Perhaps the part that pushes others away once experienced closeness as a threat. These strategies become outdated, but they remain until they are seen and recontextualized. Integration is not about erasing these tendencies, but bringing them into awareness so they no longer operate in the dark. When you approach yourself with the intention to integrate rather than heal, you begin to treat your inner world with more patience. You do not rush to feel better, or bypass the discomfort with positive thinking. Instead, you lean in, you witness the pain without trying to silence it. You begin to speak with the parts of you that have long been ignored. This process is not glamorous or clean. It is often quiet, slow, and messy. But it is real, it is honest, and over time it produces something that healing alone cannot: depth. The integrated person does not seek perfection. They do not live without wounds. Rather, they carry their wounds with dignity, aware of how those experiences live in their body and influence their mind. They recognize their triggers not as failures, but as opportunities to understand what is still unresolved. They learn to sit with themselves in moments of distress without judgment. Integration cultivates inner stability, not because all pain is gone, but because nothing inside is alien anymore. There are no more strangers in the psyche. The exiled parts have been brought home. This is not something that happens all at once. Integration unfolds gradually in layers. A memory may resurface and be seen in a new light. A habitual reaction may soften as you recognize its roots. An emotional pattern may begin to loosen its grip as you acknowledge its original function. What once felt automatic begins to feel optional. That is the power of awareness. You begin to choose rather than react. You begin to respond from your full self, not just from the wound. Often, people seek healing in order to escape pain, but integration asks a different question. Not how do I escape, but how do I relate? How do I relate to my fear, my sadness, my anger, my longing? How do I hold space for these inner experiences without being overtaken by them or cutting them off? Integration is not the absence of suffering, but the presence of relationship. When you relate to your inner world, you no longer need to suppress or disown it. You begin to trust yourself to hold your own complexity. Pain does not become your identity, but it becomes part of your story. And when it is part of your story, it can also be part of your strength. You gain insight, you gain empathy, you gain a deeper sense of connection to the world around you. You stop pretending to be flawless and begin to embody authenticity. That is what others feel when they meet someone who is truly integrated. Not perfection, but presence. A person who has stopped waging war against themselves radiates a kind of peace that cannot be faked. The work of integration is never finished, because the psyche is vast and ever changing, but it becomes a way of living, a commitment to meet yourself again and again, to keep making space for whatever arises, to stay present even when presence is uncomfortable. And over time, what you begin to feel is not just the weight of your wounds, but the power of your wholeness, the quiet strength that comes from knowing you are no longer running from any part of yourself. Pain is the doorway to authenticity, not because suffering is noble, but because pain strips away illusion. When you are in pain, deep emotional, soul-level pain, you are no longer capable of pretending. The layers that protect you, the roles you perform, the identities you try to uphold all begin to fall away. Pain demands your attention. It pulls you into the present moment whether you want it or not. It unmasks what you have tried to hide, both from yourself and from the world. It shows you who you are beneath your defenses, and often what it reveals is not what you expected. You may find that beneath your anger is grief. Beneath your grief is longing, beneath your longing is love, and beneath your love is the truth of who you are, raw, unguarded, human. Authenticity is not a performance. It is not an aesthetic or a brand. It is not about being real in a way that others find palatable. Authenticity is what remains when you stop trying to be anything at all. When the pain has dismantled your pretense, what is left is something terrifying and beautiful, your unfiltered presence. In that state, you are not trying to win approval, to be impressive, or to be understood. You are simply being, with nothing to protect and nothing to prove. This kind of presence is rare, not because it is unreachable, but because it requires you to pass through the fire of discomfort. It asks that you stop hiding from yourself. It asks that you stop curating your life to avoid pain. It invites you to feel what you've avoided for so long, to inhabit the spaces you've left empty, to speak the words you've buried deep within. Pain leads to authenticity because it demands that you feel instead of escape. Most people live at a distance from themselves. They live in their heads, in their distractions, in their routines. They do not slow down long enough to ask what is true beneath the surface. But pain has a way of interrupting that. It brings everything to a halt. Suddenly, you are forced to listen to your body, your heart, your spirit. You are forced to ask, what is hurting? Why is this here? What am I not seeing? What have I abandoned in myself to avoid this? These are not comfortable questions. They strip away all that is false. They do not offer quick answers. But if you stay with them, if you allow the pain to guide you instead of scare you, you begin to hear something deeper. You begin to hear the voice of your truth, quiet, persistent, and utterly your own. The painful moments in life often become the turning points. They are the places where the old self no longer works, where the old ways of coping collapse. And in that collapse, there is an opening. Something new begins to emerge, not from outside, but from within. This emergence is not dramatic or sudden. It is a slow unfolding, like a flower blooming through cracked concrete. The process is not about creating a new identity. It is about revealing the one that was buried under fear and adaptation. Pain makes you honest. It tells you what matters. It shows you what you care about, what you long for, what you need to let go of. It helps you see what is real, not because it is pleasant, but because it is impossible to ignore. When you allow pain to lead you inward, you discover a part of yourself that is not fragile, but grounded. A part that does not need validation because it exists beyond comparison, a part that does not seek to escape reality, but to meet it fully. This is the root of authenticity, the ability to stand in your own experience unguarded and say, this is what is true for me. That truth does not need to be loud. It does not need to convince anyone. It does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be felt. And once it is felt, it begins to shape your life in quiet but powerful ways. Your choices shift, your relationships change, your values become clearer. You begin to align your outer world with your inner reality, and in doing so, you begin to live not from a place of performance, but from a place of wholeness. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes a guide. It becomes the teacher you never wanted but always needed. It shows you how to be real, not in fragments, not in moments, but as a way of being. And through that painful, honest, and courageous journey inward, you come to know yourself, not as an idea, but as a living, breathing presence. Pain, when fully met, becomes not just a wound, but a threshold. On the other side is not perfection, but truth, and from that truth everything else begins. Your unlived life lives in your wounds because everything you did not allow yourself to feel, express, pursue, or become has gathered there. Every time you silenced a part of yourself in order to belong, every time you turned away from what you truly desired because it felt too risky or unsafe, a fragment of your aliveness was left behind. The wound is not only where pain resides, it is where your potential has been buried. What you call trauma, rejection, or heartbreak is also the very place where your creativity, your boldness, your authenticity once tried to emerge and was shut down. And it is still there, waiting not just for healing, but for recognition. When you were told that your feelings were too much, you learned to hold them in. When you were shamed for expressing your needs, you learned to minimize yourself. When your curiosity, imagination, or instincts were dismissed or punished, you learned to play small. But those parts of you did not disappear. They retreated inward and became ghosts in your psyche, haunting you not with terror, but with longing. The unlived life does not scream at whispers. It shows up in restlessness, in dissatisfaction, in the ache you feel even when everything looks fine on the outside. It emerges in the moments you feel most disconnected from yourself, when you sense there is more to you than you've dared to live. It appears as regret, as yearning, as the quiet sense that something essential has been left behind. The wound carries not only what hurt you, but what you had to sacrifice in response to that hurt. You gave up pieces of yourself to survive. You adapted, you conformed, you hid what made you different or vulnerable. This was intelligent. It was necessary, but it was also costly. And now, as you revisit those wounds, not only must you feel the original pain, you must also confront what that pain prevented you from becoming. You must face the fact that parts of your life were shaped not by who you truly are, but by who you thought you needed to be in order to stay safe. The unlived life is not a collection of missed opportunities. It is the sum of all the suppressed truths and unexpressed capacities that still wait for permission to exist. To enter the wound consciously is to begin reclaiming that permission. It is to meet the part of you that stopped singing, painting, dancing, speaking, asking, exploring, whatever it was that once made you feel alive. The work is not only to comfort the pain, but to listen for what else lies there. Beneath the sorrow is often a vision of the life you wanted, but could not live. Beneath the fear is a voice that once wanted to speak. Beneath the anger is a fire that once tried to burn brightly. These are not just feelings to process. They are the threads of your vitality, the core of your unlived life asking to be restored. What begins as grief slowly becomes a path. As you sit with the wound and allow it to speak, you begin to realize that it has been holding on to more than pain. It has been holding your dreams. The path of integration is not just about healing trauma. It is about rescuing your aliveness from where it was trapped. You begin to sense the outlines of the person you might have become if you had not learned to turn away from yourself. And though you cannot change the past, you can begin again. You can make space for those silenced parts now. You can invite them into your choices, into your voice, into your presence. You can begin to live not as the person the world demanded you be, but as the person you truly are. This process is tender and slow. It cannot be forced. You may find that the closer you get to your unlived life, the more resistance arises, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of your own power. This is natural. It is the same fear that once caused you to bury those parts in the first place, but now you are no longer a child. You have the capacity to hold these fears with awareness rather than collapse into them. You can choose to take small steps toward what calls you, even if your voice shakes, even if you don't yet believe you are ready, because the truth is, the wound has been keeping something precious for you. And when you stop fearing it, you discover not only who you were, but who you still might be. Do not rush to fix or escape it, because what you are feeling is not something broken to be repaired, but something real to be understood. The discomfort that rises within you when you face your wound is not an error, It is the very presence of your truth pushing through the surface. Most people have been conditioned to avoid pain at all costs. We numb it, distract from it, talk over it, rationalize it, or spiritualize it away. We create entire identities around the avoidance of pain, but in doing so, we also avoid the opportunity to truly know ourselves. Pain is not just a signal that something is wrong. It is also a signal that something important is happening. It is the psyche's way of alerting you that there is something inside that wants to be felt, something that is asking to be integrated rather than dismissed. When you rush to fix your pain, you treat it as a problem rather than a message. You seek solutions instead of listening. But emotional pain is not like a broken object. It cannot be mended by external action alone. It must be heard, seen, and met with presence. Trying to fix it too quickly often results in spiritual bypassing, where you try to leap to the lesson before allowing yourself to fully feel the weight of the experience. But what you avoid feeling does not disappear, it waits. It waits in the corners of your body, in your nervous system, in your thoughts and behaviors. It becomes a pattern, a tension, a trigger. It keeps surfacing, not to torment you, but to invite you back to yourself. If you want to truly transform, you must slow down. You must resist the impulse to escape and instead remain with what is rising. Not to fix it, not to get rid of it, but to learn from it. This is the deeper intelligence of the psyche. It presents pain not as punishment, but as an invitation. An invitation to reconnect with what has been exiled within you. Often, the parts of ourselves that are the most wounded are also the most vital. They are the parts that were most alive, most sensitive, most intuitive. These parts were shamed, suppressed, or silenced because they were inconvenient in a world that doesn't know how to hold sensitivity, so we buried them, but they never stopped existing. They call to us through our wounds. When you feel pain rising in your chest or a lump in your throat, it is often that younger, hidden part of you reaching up, asking if now is the time you'll finally listen. To stay with your pain is to allow it to show you something you cannot yet see. It may show you a truth you've long denied. It may reveal a grief that has never been voiced. It may expose an illusion you've been living under, or a need you've never allowed yourself to claim. All of these are sacred revelations, but you can only access them if you stop trying to run. To stay does not mean to wallow. It does not mean to become lost in suffering. It means to become intimate with yourself in a way that most people never do. It means to ask without judgment, what is here? What am I feeling? What is this moment trying to teach me? And then to allow the answers to arise not from your mind, but from your body, your breath, your being. There is wisdom in waiting. In the stillness of your attention, the wound begins to unfold its hidden layers. What felt like despair may reveal longing. What felt like rage may reveal a deep need for safety. What felt like emptiness may reveal the absence of self. Love, these are not quick fixes. They are truths. And truth takes time to emerge. It needs space. It needs trust. It needs you to be present without trying to change the outcome. The more you can sit with your discomfort without needing it to resolve on your timeline, the more you create a container for true healing to occur. When you allow yourself to be with what hurts, you begin to remember what it feels like to be whole, not because the pain vanishes, but because you stop fragmenting yourself around it. You stop fighting yourself. You stop abandoning yourself. You begin to see that even in the ache there is a kind of peace, a quiet knowing that you are capable of holding your own experience with courage and grace. And from that place, healing doesn't come as a fix, but as a return. A return to feeling, a return to truth, a return to the forgotten parts of you that have been waiting not to be saved, but to be seen. Resistance is the real prison, not the wound itself. The pain you fear is rarely what causes your deepest suffering. It is your avoidance of that pain, your insistence on staying safe from discomfort, that binds you. You build mental and emotional walls to protect yourself, but in doing so, you trap your own aliveness behind those very walls. You convince yourself that if you stay in control, stay positive, stay unbothered, you'll avoid being hurt. But pain still finds its way in, not through what happens to you, but through what you deny within yourself. The wound you resist becomes the force that silently governs your choices, your habits, your relationships. You do not see its influence clearly because your mind has wrapped it in clever explanations, rationalizations, and distractions. Yet it controls you nonetheless. It is the subtle voice that tells you not to trust, not to hope, not to speak, not to feel too much. When you resist what arises in your inner world, you create a split within yourself. A part of you becomes the enforcer, trying to manage, suppress, or eradicate the part of you that hurts. This internal war consumes energy and makes life feel heavy, tense, and repetitive. You begin to live in strategies rather than presence. You anticipate threat even in safe places. You carry armor even when there is no battle. You become so focused on surviving that you forget how to truly live. Resistance can take many forms: perfectionism, cynicism, endless busyness, chronic indecision, or the pursuit of control. But they all serve the same purpose, keeping you from feeling what you once believed would overwhelm you. Yet what you resist grows stronger. The wound you push down will find new ways to surface, through your body, your mood, your dreams, your relationships. It will not be silenced. It will manifest as anxiety, as irritability, as numbness, as a vague but persistent sense that something is missing. It will pull you back again and again until you stop running and turn to face it. That is the paradox. The pain you flee is also the pain that holds your freedom. When you resist it, it torments you. When you meet it, it transforms you. The prison opens not when the pain disappears, but when the resistance does. To release resistance does not mean to give up or collapse. It means to stop fighting your inner experience. It means to allow yourself to feel without judgment. It means to trust that you are capable of being with what arises without it destroying you. Most of what you fear inside yourself is not dangerous. It is just unfamiliar. It is emotion you haven't allowed to move. It is memory you haven't wanted to hold. It is vulnerability you haven't been taught how to honor. But once you stop resisting, these experiences shift. They stop appearing as threats and start revealing their true nature as messengers, not enemies. This surrender is an act of great courage. You will not feel ready. You may feel exposed, uncertain, or even disoriented, but you will also begin to feel real. You will notice that the weight you've carried from suppressing your truth starts to lift. You'll become less reactive because you're no longer at war within. You'll start to trust yourself, not because everything feels good, but because you know you can handle whatever arises. This is the beginning of inner strength, not through control, but through deep presence. Many people misunderstand strength. They think it is about dominance, mastery, or overcoming, but real strength is the capacity to stay open in the face of discomfort. It is the ability to remain soft and honest when every part of you wants to shut down. It is the quiet power of not turning away from yourself. When resistance fades, your natural intelligence awakens. You begin to feel what's true beneath the noise of the mind. You stop clinging to stories that kept you small. You become less interested in defending an identity and more curious about discovering who you really are. This is not the path of ease, but it is the path of liberation. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once terrified you becomes familiar. What once kept you stuck begins to dissolve, and in that space something new emerges. You feel life again, not as something to fear, but as something to participate in. The prison door was never locked. It only required the willingness to stop resisting what you thought you had to escape. The descent into yourself is sacred. It is not a fall into chaos, but a return to the forgotten chambers of your soul. Most people avoid this inner journey because they have been taught that darkness means danger, that what is buried inside is something to be feared or silenced. But the truth is, your depths hold the parts of you that were once vibrant and whole, before the world told you they were unacceptable. To descend is not to be lost, it is to remember. It is to shed the layers of performance and protection and meet yourself beneath the surface, without the filters, without the masks. This sacred descent is not always beautiful. In fact, it is often marked by confusion, grief, and uncertainty. It feels like stepping into a place with no map, where the usual rules no longer apply. You might feel like something is dying, and in many ways, something is. The false identity you constructed to survive is beginning to dissolve, and that loss can feel disorienting. You may grieve the roles you played, the relationships that no longer align, the beliefs that once gave you security. But that grief is holy. It is the mourning of your own forgetting. It is the release of what was never truly you. In the descent, time slows down. You begin to notice the details of your inner world, the shape of a feeling, the rhythm of a thought, the tone of your inner voice. You begin to sense the younger parts of you that still live in memory, still hold pain that was never spoken. These fragments of yourself are not meant to be fixed. They are meant to be reclaimed. You are not there to change them, but to listen. You are not there to dominate them, but to understand. As you descend, you begin to see how often you've tried to escape discomfort by rushing towards solutions, by pretending to be fine, by telling stories that make you feel in control. And now, stripped of distraction, you are simply here with yourself. It is in this inner stillness that something ancient begins to stir, a deeper knowing, a quiet voice beneath the noise. It does not shout. It does not demand. It waits. It has always waited for you to slow down enough to hear it. This voice belongs to the part of you that remembers who you are beyond your trauma, beyond your fears, beyond the expectations placed on you. It is not concerned with success or image. It speaks in symbols, in sensations, in dreams. It speaks of truth, not comfort. And when you begin to listen, really listen, you discover that you were never broken, only buried. The descent teaches humility. You begin to see that many of your judgments were defenses, that much of your certainty was fear in disguise, that what you thought was strength was often armor. And as these illusions dissolve, you soften. You forgive yourself for what you didn't know. You forgive the younger you for the ways they coped. You begin to offer compassion where once there was shame. You begin to offer presence where once there was punishment. This is not a path of self-improvement. It is a path of self-remembering. In the quiet of your descent, you may feel alone, but you are not. Others have walked this path. Others have sat with their shadows and wept over forgotten wounds. You are part of a lineage of brave souls who chose truth over comfort, integrity over appearance, depth over superficiality. You are not broken for feeling pain. You are human, and to feel deeply is not a flaw, it is a gift. A gift that allows you to know yourself, to connect with others, to live with meaning. This sacred journey does not end in answers but in integration. You do not climb back to the surface as the same person. You return with a deeper presence, a clearer voice, a more grounded heart. You return with a kind of wholeness that cannot be faked. It is not about being healed in the conventional sense. It is about no longer abandoning yourself, no longer fragmenting in the face of pain, no longer running from the parts of you that hurt. In this way, your descent becomes your liberation. It is not the end of your story. It is the moment you begin to live from your center, not your wounds. The self emerges through suffering, not in spite of it. It is in the raw and unfiltered experience of pain that something deeper and more authentic begins to take form. Most people seek to avoid suffering at all costs. They run from it, numb it, rationalize it, or suppress it. But suffering, when faced with presence and sincerity, becomes the very crucible in which the deeper self is born. It strips away the illusions we cling to, the personas we wear, and the stories we tell to keep ourselves feeling safe or valuable. What remains after the fire is not destruction, but clarity. In suffering, all that is false eventually burns away. When pain enters a life, it rarely announces itself with meaning. It feels like chaos, a betrayal, a loss of control. We often question why it has arrived, or whether we've done something wrong to deserve it. But pain is not a punishment, it is a teacher. It does not answer to logic or fairness, it answers only to necessity. It enters our lives because something within us or around us must be transformed, and the old ways of being can no longer carry the truth of who we are becoming. In the initial stages of suffering, we tend to resist. We try to return to normal, to reassemble the life we once knew. But the old life is gone, and the attempt to return only deepens the disconnection. True transformation begins the moment we stop resisting the pain and start listening to what it is asking of us. Suffering creates a rupture in the psyche that forces us inward. It breaks the rhythm of everyday life, and demands that we confront ourselves in a deeper way. The distractions fall away. The things we once thought were important often lose their significance. What we are left with is something uncomfortable but real, ourselves, stripped of pretense. It is here, in this quiet and vulnerable space, that the self begins to emerge. Not the self built by ambition, expectation, or social conditioning, but the deeper self that has been waiting patiently beneath the surface. This self does not need validation. It does not compete or compare. It does not fear silence or solitude. It simply is. As suffering deepens, we begin to see that much of what we feared in life was not death, but the loss of identity. The suffering shatters the image of who we thought we were, and that can feel like a kind of death. But beyond the death of identity is the birth of truth. We begin to realize that we are not our achievements, not our roles, not our reputations. We are something much larger and much quieter than all of those things. We are presence, we are awareness, we are a soul having a human experience, and from this place a deeper compassion for ourselves and others naturally arises. Through suffering, we begin to see the pain of others with new eyes. We understand what it means to be lost, to be afraid, to grieve. We lose interest in judgment and gain interest in understanding. We stop pretending to have all the answers and start asking better questions. The suffering humbles us, but it also connects us. We realize that no one escapes the depths, and in that shared truth, we find a sense of humanity that is often missing in times of comfort. The self that emerges from suffering is not just wiser, it is more alive. It has touched the depths of the soul and returned with something essential, the capacity to stay present with life as it is, not just as we wish it to be. This self no longer seeks constant pleasure or escape. It finds value in the full spectrum of being, in joy and sadness, in gain and loss, in birth and death. It embraces paradox. It lives with greater intention. It does not seek perfection, but embraces wholeness, knowing that wholeness includes the wound, the scar, the sorrow. In the end, suffering does not leave us empty, though it may feel that way for a time. It clears space. It empties out what was never truly us, and in that space, the self can finally breathe. Not the self shaped by the outer world, but the self rooted in the inner world, authentic, resilient, and awake. Freedom is found in wholeness, not in perfection. Most people chase freedom by trying to eliminate what they perceive as flaws. They believe that if they can become good enough, healed enough, productive enough, or enlightened enough, they will finally be free from their suffering. But this pursuit, though often well-intentioned, is misguided. The more you reject, suppress, or deny parts of yourself, the more fragmented you become, and in fragmentation, freedom cannot exist. Wholeness does not require you to be without wounds. It requires you to accept that your wounds are part of your truth. Freedom is not the absence of brokenness. It is the radical acceptance of your complexity, your contradictions, your full humanity. There is a common belief that to be whole, one must be entirely in the light, positive, composed, balanced at all times. But wholeness includes both the light and the dark. It includes the chaos and the clarity, the fear and the courage, the grief and the joy. When you allow yourself to embrace all that you are without dividing yourself into good and bad, worthy and unworthy, you return to an inner unity that cannot be taken from you. This is the kind of freedom that is unshakable, not because it is invulnerable, but because it is rooted in truth. To live in wholeness means to stop waging war with yourself. It means no longer trying to silence your sadness or hide your rage. It means recognizing that these emotions are not signs of failure, but signals from the psyche that something within you needs attention. They are messages from the soul asking to be heard. When you turn toward them with curiosity rather than judgment, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that have long been exiled. These exiled parts carry not only pain, but power. Within them are pieces of your intuition, creativity, sensitivity, and strength. When you welcome them home, you do not become more flawed, you become more real. Freedom also means living without the compulsion to constantly prove your worth. So many people are caught in a loop of performance, trying to earn love, approval, or belonging by becoming someone they think others want them to be. This way of living is exhausting, and it always leaves you feeling hollow because it is rooted in disconnection from the true self. Wholeness liberates you from this cycle. When you know who you are beyond roles and expectations, you no longer need to pretend. You can show up with your truth even when it is imperfect, even when it is uncomfortable, because your sense of self is not tied to external validation. This is not arrogance, it is authenticity. True wholeness also makes space for change. It understands that being whole does not mean being static. You are allowed to evolve, you are allowed to grow, you are allowed to outgrow old beliefs, release old identities, and step into new ways of being. But this evolution is not born from shame or self-rejection. It is born from love, a love deep enough to say, I accept myself as I am, and I trust that I can become more. This kind of change is sustainable because it honors the journey instead of trying to escape it. It is rooted in self-compassion, not self-criticism. When you live from a place of wholeness, your relationships also begin to shift. You stop needing others to complete you, fix you, or save you. You come into connection not from a place of deficiency, but from a place of fullness. You are able to love more deeply because you are not loving to get something. You are loving because it flows naturally from within. You are able to hold space for others in their complexity because you have learned to hold space for your own. This creates a different kind of intimacy, one that is not based on roles or performance, but on presence and truth. In wholeness, freedom is no longer a distant goal. It is something you begin to feel in your body, in your breath, in your choices. You begin to walk through life with a sense of rootedness, not because life is easy or predictable, but because you are no longer divided against yourself. You trust your inner knowing. You listen to your limits. You honor your needs. You recognize your value not because someone else confirms it, but because it exists inherently as part of your being. Wholeness doesn't make you perfect. It makes you free to be exactly as you are, fully alive, fully human, and fully here.